This morning I want to talk about love. I take for my theme the greatest commandment. If we know how to love God with all our mind, heart, soul, and strength, all our problems would be solved. That is the one great commandment. If we could spend 4 years in a college learning one thing, how to love God with all our mind, heart, soul, and strength, that's all we would need to know. And so I wanted to take that theme today. How do you love? Love could solve all problems, as you know, because love is the power that brings everything into perfectly adjusted and harmonious relationship with everything else. And if you didn't do anything but love, every cell in your body would commence to function perfectly adjusted and harmonious relationship with every other cell, and cancerous tissues would slough off. Indigestion would be cured. Arthritis would just fall away. The miracle, though, isn't the cure. The miracle is to so attune yourself to love so you could have nothing but love. Even fear and good honest worry drives out love. Perfect love casteth out fear, and fear can have a power of neutralizing love. But how can you love God? I have found people who look at things love them. Dr. Carver just looked at the little flowers. He looked at them so much he loved them, and they talked to him. Is this functioning all right? You can hear all right back there? And so he looks at flowers until he loved them, and they talk to him. Anything you love will talk to you. I'll have to admit very frankly and honestly that I don't love a piano because it just fill up the room in my study that I want to be writing, and I be a constant judgment on me because I couldn't play a note. And the piano doesn't talk to me, but Gretchen loves the piano, and she sits down. It talks to her and talks to us, and that's why the flower talked to Dr. Carver. Now, I got hold of an old book, a phrenological book, when I was a little boy that had heads and pictures of heads and noses. And my father said that is the book that gave me my start in life. I found there that I could be a success in something, so he went to college. He and his brother, only ones that family of 13 that did go to college. So I began to look at people until I can read all the bumps on all your heads, for instance, right now. And I even was called on, because I became so expert in this, that I was called on to talk to those Kiwanis clubs. And the mayor of the city came up, St. Paul, and I had to read his head. And I announced to them bravely I could tell the character of every Irishman's wife by the bumps on his head. And so, but I want to tell you this, whether you believe in phrenology or not, I owe a lot to it for this reason. It made me look at people. And if you look at people enough, you love them. And I've got to love people. Now, how can you look at God, though, whom thou hast not seen? And if you could only look at God enough, you would love him. And so, here's a diagram by which you can love. Is it better up on the horse, isn't it? Nothing like work on them. How can you look at God? Well, Dr. Carver looked at God through the little flower. He saw God in everything. And I see God shining through the eyes of people. Dr. Frank Laubach has the pictures of Jesus all over the room, wherever he goes. And by looking at those pictures of Jesus, he's grown to look more like Jesus himself. And you look at Dr. Carver, and you almost see you're looking into the mirror and seeing the face of God. Well, here is different ways of seeing God. Well, I have found that looking at pictures of Jesus will help. Meeting in camps like this where there's nothing but love, I find they get an atmosphere of love. God is love, and looking at love, looking in the face of love, you'll find God. And so this morning I propose to establish a college farthest out, the sole purpose of which will teach folks how to love God. And if you can take 4 years to learn how to love God, you'll be a thoroughly educated person. For Jesus said you should love God with all your strength. That means to say with all your body, and all your mind, and all your heart, and all your soul. And when you can love God with all those ways, you can love God. But I couldn't sit here and just stare at somebody without moving my eyes for half a day. I couldn't look at a picture of Jesus without even blinking my eyes for half a day. You have to do it rhythmically. I believe in food, but you can't eat food all day. It is true that cattle go out there and they'll eat grass, begin in the morning, and they'll eat all day. They have an alchemy that turns that a regular factory for turning grass into nourishing milk. But we can't eat all day, so we do it rhythmically. Morning, noon, and night. Sleep is a mighty valuable thing, but so valuable it builds people up, but you don't lie down and sleep like polar bear for 5 months. You do it 7 hours one night, 7 hours the next night. You alternate. You'll find the way to do anything effectively, even to love, is to do it rhythmically. Your husband never get his work done if you just were calling him up every few minutes. I was driven out to camp in Kansas by a businessman, and he had a dear old secretary, dear old lady that taught an awful lot of him. And just before we left his house, he drove out to took me out and pick up his wife, and then picked up Glenn Harding and me, and we were going to go out. And while he was getting the car in shape, the secretary called him up. But he was out, so his wife said, "I'll have you call you." And after we were miles away from Kansas City, she said, "Oh, that's right." And I said, "By the way, did you tell your husband that the secretary called him?" "Oh, no, I forgot." And he said, "Well, she just is kind of a nuisance. She always calls up just for any little thing." But riding on a little further to a little town, we finally went in and he paid 40 cents and phoned back. And she said, "Oh, I just called up to say goodbye." Now, the point was, if little Glenny boy, he loves me, little Jimmy, if he just followed me said loved me all the time and just followed me around, and I had to give all my time to him, you see, that he should do it rhythmically. You love anyone, you should be done rhythmically. And we can do that with God. And so let's begin here with loving God with all our strength. I had the privilege of training under the greatest track coach in the world. He himself was trained himself. I was a whole track team himself. And he taught us the secret was little and often. Train every day and then get your rest. And I told you, I think the other day, how my brother won the Missouri Valley meet because I took him over and told him to lay off every other day. Let the elasticity in his sleeping muscles recoup themselves on the other days. And the coach was blowing him up because he was laying off every other day. And how the years before he had never had won first place, but under this training he won the meet. Tension and relaxation. The trouble with most athletic coaches is they wear their men out, burn them out by too much tension. The greatest trainer of rowing crews in the world said that crew that gets the most rest between strokes always wins the race. And in our rhythms we have here, if I had a college farthest out, I would have things like this to music, rhythm. There is release and more relaxation, training in relaxation almost more than intention. However, if you're in tension all the time, you would be a candidate for the state hospital. If you're relaxed all the time, you'd be like some of the people I saw riding down through the South, sitting on their front verandas of their little shacks. Some of them sit and think, and some just sit. Now, if you want to accomplish something, get the rhythm. But now I'm not here to talk about physical. Let's turn to the mind. The balanced rhythm there is to be alternately enthusiastic and have the capacity for stillness. As Dean of Macalester College, I had to pass on all the candidates that coming in, all the freshmen. I had to look at the papers they submitted to see if they'd come from an accredited high school. I got so disgusted with looking at papers. I didn't give a snap of my finger whether they came from an accredited high school or not. I wanted to know if I wanted to look into their face and see if they were an accredited boy. As I say, I used to look at the bumps on their heads to read their character. Now I like to look into their eyes to read their souls. I like to look at the bumps in their eyes, both. And if they had a good, clear soul and they had a good, eager capacities, I wouldn't have asked, I would care whether they went to high school. Edison, Abraham Lincoln couldn't have gotten in Macalester College because they didn't get through the first grade. They'd never gone to an accredited school. Why, we'd have shut out all the geniuses I know. Shakespeare couldn't have gotten in. Homer never went to an accredited high school. Actually, I would like to have given another test. I'll tell you what the test is. Are you able to be enthusiastic? When I was teaching in high school, I was reading one day from a story of Robert Louis Stevenson, and it was getting to a very exciting place, and I saw the time was about up, so I said, well, I'll finish this tomorrow. A little boy on the front seat said, go on, go on. And everybody laughed, and his face got red. He simply was out of this world. He had forgotten he was in the schoolroom. I didn't say it out loud, but I said to myself, Vernon, you're one I'd like to have in my college farthest out, because you have a capacity for enthusiasm. As a matter of fact, he did ask me after a while what college I graduated from, Grinnell. Well, then he went to Grinnell, and he became a kind of a successor to mine. I'd been editor of the literary magazine, and he became editor of it. Now, enthusiasm, and then the capacity to be still. I have written a textbook. I've taught short story writing for many, many years. And my method of starting them out is to put a sentence on the board like this. Uncle John sat in front of his fire in his big armchair, smoking his pipe. And I tell the students to shut their eyes and wait till the picture came. They began to get it clear. Wait until the light begins to light up his face, and they begin to see the wrinkles, until he looks like different from any other man they ever saw. And they see the shadows in the room, and perhaps a little rag rug on the floor, or a palatial rug. It may be in a millionaire's house. Well, I know two descriptions are the same, but they were vital. I said, wait until the picture comes, and then write as fast as you can. Well, supposing I would assign that, and then the boy in the back row would poke another boy. Bill, you're going to sleep. Say, Harry, who are you going to take the party tonight? I'm sorry, Harry and Bill, but you don't fit into my college farthest out. I'm sorry, but you don't qualify. Because you can't get still. We're going to have a little period of stillness tonight. Silence, just for one night. We want to we have periods of silence. My test would see your capacity for enthusiasm and capacity to be still. All right, come into my college. We can do something with you. There came to Grinnell College, in my own class, a boy named William Paul. Came from the country. He'd outgrown his clothes. His arms dangled out of his sleeves, several inches. He looked just like Ichabod Crane would look. And he even had a kind of a high piping voice, and which he put pebbles in it and brought it down, became a good debater ultimately. But he never got better than a B or a C, very rarely a B. I think he averaged about a C grade. It's awkward and everything else. He went out one summer to sell books, and he sold so many books he earned enough money to pay all the last 3 years in college. I figured that they felt sorry for the poor semi-crippled looking chap stumping along with that awkward walk. But he startled me when he invited me to come up to his room and meet with a trainer of the books that he sold. It had come from Chicago. He said, I'm trying to get a bunch of the Grinnell boys to go out and sell books. I'm going to get a commission on the books they sell, and I'd like to have you come up and join the crowd. I said, no. There's a picture, by the way, over there in the children's classroom, drawn by one of our little girls, but deliver us from temptation, deliver us from evil. And there's a picture of the devil there, and Jesus carrying away the sweet little girl who drew the picture. And the devil was very well drawn, but no better drawn than my mother had drawn the picture of a typical book agent, horns and hoofs, everything. I said, why, if I went out to sell books, my mother would turn over in her grave if she were dead, but she wasn't dead. It'd be enough to kill her. No, I said, I can't do that. But he said, come up and see the way they do it. You'll learn a lot. I said, oh, I'm glad to learn. I went up. A man 6 feet tall, as thin as a rail, crossed his legs, and his legs, I know, reached halfway across the room. He explained to us that all we had to do is to memorize 3 little speeches, one to mothers, one to businessmen, one to other people. And then we could have, mothers would make us a little bag we could carry under our coat and carry the prospectus. We'd walk in hands-free. No one would know we were a book agent. And then sit down and give the little speech. And if we held out for 90 days and didn't sell a book, the company would pay us a salary for the 3 months that we were out. Well, that finally won me over. And I went out. They said, you're shy, it'll develop your character and your personality. After 1 month, I hadn't sold enough books to buy one good breakfast. And the company saw they were going to lose money on that 90-day contract. For they didn't know what kind of person they'd signed up. I looked very tame and sweet and like I could give up very easily. But I'm the kind that Irishmen describe. If you don't look out, I'll stick my nose between your teeth and I won't let go. Well, they saw they were in for paying a salary to a man who hadn't earned it. So they said, we're going to transfer you to another section and have you go around with Mr. Paul in Marshalltown for 1 day, and he'll teach you how to sell books. And did he teach me? He started out in the morning at the home of an old lady that had no money. He wasted no time. He didn't even try to sell a book. He was perfectly relaxed. I was tense the minute I started out. Relaxed, stillness here. And he just got a list from her. She loved to gossip about all the neighbors, what their names were, how many children they had, and everything else. He thanked her, went to the next house, which was a millionaire. It looked like a millionaire's house. A maid came to the door. Is Mrs. Clark in? Yes. And 2 handsome young college men walked in after the maid, sat down in the parlor. When Mrs. Clark came in, curious to know what these young men wanted, Mr. Paul rose and said, Mrs. Clark, meet Mr. Clark. I wonder if you could be related. I tried to explain to him that all my uncles were aunts and that I had no Clarks in that state. It didn't make any difference. When we met another Mrs. Clark, I wondered if you could be related. We sat down, no tension at all. a fly lit on his knee, and he caught the fly. I learned how to catch flies. Don't do it this way. Do it this way. I thought if a man can go out and sell books and so calm that he'll catch flies, that there's somebody to watch. But presently he said, now you have 5 little children. Yes, how did you know that? And little children ask a lot of questions that mothers don't know how to answer. Why, yes, why, you know that too. Well, I know some other things too, Mrs. Clark. Professor Ruoff of the University of Pennsylvania has written a book that will answer those questions that mothers can't answer. Here is the book. Now, if you'll sign your name right here, and you can take your choice of binding. She signed it right away. Goodbye. He went right next door, and he sold one there, and there, and there, and there, till 6 o'clock. Why, goodness. No brains. He couldn't get even a C in college. But he had enthusiasm, and he had stillness. 6 o'clock, I said, well, it's a long day for me. I get exhausted by 3. You have to go home, and they're worn out. And so you're all over now for the day. Oh, no, he said. We go down to where the working classes live, from 7 till 9, where the wives are out working also. And we worked them from 7 till 9. Finally, we reached his room at 10 o'clock, and he made me sleep in the cot, and he made a bed on the floor. The lights were out, and at last I wouldn't have to hear those little speeches. Then out of the darkness there came a voice. Good evening, Mrs. Bedbug. I understand you have a good many little bedbugs. Now, little bedbugs ask a lot of questions that mothers cannot answer. Professor Ruoff of the University of Pennsylvania has written a book that will answer the questions of little bedbugs. Why, folks, if I said to myself, if a man can sell books all day and then sell to Mrs. Bedbug at night, you can't stop him. There's the kind of man I want in my college. Well, he went into the ministry, but even then he didn't use good grammar. He didn't even say, he'd never say coming and going, he'd say coming and going. He only made one mistake in grammar in his life, and the minute he'd done it, he's seen it. Well, he went into the ministry, and he got a job and the head of the rescue mission in Minneapolis. 100,000 lumberjacks passed through his hands. He has charge of an immense hotel, the St. James Hotel. If you go to Minneapolis and you haven't the money for a room or a meal, you go there, and he'll give you a broom and a bucket, and he'll let you earn your meal. And if you have to pay for it, you don't have to pay more than 10 cents. And he has a farm out there developed where he sends it down and outers to alcoholics to get built up. And you get raise the strawberries as big as plums, and cream, as you can cut it with a knife. You can just, that supports this back and forth. He has simply he's been president of the Rescue Mission Workers of America, I think, for years. He was voted the most valuable citizen in Minneapolis, and Grinnell College gave him an honorary doctor's degree before they gave me a doctor's degree. And on our 45th anniversary, my class, they made William Paul and Glenn Clark the center of their celebration, and they had me talk to them from morning till night on Camps Farthest Out until it turned the class into a real little CFO, that whole reunion. And William Paul is one of the followers of this philosophy. But I was a follower of him that day, and I learned so much. Now, I have an allergy against only one kind of person, and I've overcome that at last. And that was the sissy boy, especially the egotistical sissy boy that would give the girls some candy and get them to write their essays for them. And when I went to Harvard and registering for the graduate school, I heard a woman's voice saying that she didn't think she'd take Chaucer. And I looked down the row of all the men registering. I didn't see any lady. After a while, I heard the young lady say that she thought she'd take Kittredge's English, and I looked under the tables, but no little lady. When I went to Randall Hall, where we met for our big eating place, there was a graduate student, a handsome young man. He could tell I was a graduate because I had a beard. I'd cycled through Europe, came back and let the beard remain, and I looked much older 45, 50 years ago than I do right now. And he said, I'm selecting a group of 26 graduate students to sit at a table all year so we can get acquainted. You can get better acquainted, you make more friends in 1 year in a small college than you do in 4 years in a university, and I was glad to have that opportunity. But when it came to introducing them, I was horrified when he said, Mr. Clark of Des Moines, meet Roger Williams of Ouachita, Arkansas. This is Mr. Clark. Oh, Mr. Clark, just like a clock, isn't it? And I said, if I have to sit at the same table with this falsetto, I think I will lose my mind. But he told with great pride that he had better taste in clothes than his sisters. He said, I have a smaller waist than my sisters. I go down and buy their dresses for them and even try them on. But after a while, we noticed when he would come in to the meal, bubbling over with enthusiasm about what happened in Dr. Kittredge's class or in the Chaucer class, we all were listening to what he said. One day he and I went to see Marlowe and Southern in Hamlet, and we sat up with the gods. And in the last act, in the last scene, all of a sudden he went, I said, what's the matter? Did you hear that? No. Absent thee from felicity a while, Horatio. Wasn't that wonderful? After that, I loved to go to plays with him, and I'd listen to his responses, his enthusiasms. Oh, but his great enthusiasm was his grandmother. She lived back before the days of the Civil War, and she could talk Shakespeare and all. I said, why aren't you enthusiastic about your mother? Well, she was born during the Civil War, and they sent money down and at Negro schools, but no money for the white schools, and the result is she never even learned how to read and write. So she wasn't a spiritual, intellectual companion like my grandmother. One day he said, I've got a picture from my grandmother. You come up and see it. Well, I went up to his room, and he had lots of pictures around him. He's looking around. I saw a picture that looked like an old Creole, old Cree Indian or something, a wrinkled old hag. So I can't find her anywhere. I said, who's this old squirrel? That's my grandmother. I want to say, if you leave this place with enthusiasm, and if you have the capacity to get still, you have a college education. In 1 hour, I'm going to give you all a college education. When I close, you will find me at the door giving out diplomas. Just in this 1 hour, you will learn. How many of you have never went to college? Put your hands up. Some of you are too young to have been there yet. But I want to say, Starr Daily said, I'm so thankful to the Lord. Thankful that the Lord saved me the confusion of too much education. I think if enthusiasm and stillness had been squeezed out of Homer or Shakespeare, if they'd gone to college, they'd have lost everything. As a matter of fact, I lost all my genius in writing when I went to college because of the red ink and the blue pencil. And so when I began to teach creative writing, I did it in a different way. I taught them how to be enthusiastic and how to get still. And we began to do things. I'd like to establish a college where they taught that just one thing, that is to teach them how to love God with all your body, perfect rhythm, all your mind, all your heart, and all your soul. Well, let us turn then to the heart. I would ask the boys and girls when they came to this college, what is your chief craving, your greatest soul sincere desire? Well, a boy might say to me, well, I'd like to be captain of the football team, but if the boys knew it, they'd just never elect me. Well, you keep it secret. I said, I'm a father confessor. I'll never let anyone know. Wonderful to have that desire, but it should be balanced. Have the desire and then have the capacity to relinquish it and say, Lord, I would love that unless you have something better. To have a great desire. At Starr Island one day, a young woman came to me and she said, I'm a sort of a problem case in my college because I'm president of nearly every organization and I find it hard to keep up my studies. The teachers are trying to make me resign from these things and I don't want to resign. And I said, you understand that activity and this activity, that other activity and this and so on? Yes. Too many activities. Yes, she said, it's a kind of a fever, I'll admit. I said, now I want to tell you something. Will you tell me the one activity that you wish? Can you tell me the one achievement that you've never attained that you really want? You're concealing, you're making, these are all escapes. You're rushing into all these things because the one thing you really want you haven't got. She said, I wish I had a fine young man I could fall in love with and that would fall in love with me. But I never told anybody, but now you got me in a corner and I'll tell you honestly. I said, that's your sole, honest, sincere desire? Well, yes, then why be ashamed of it? You came in here to pray for you and all these activities. Let's just drop all of them and we'll pray for the main thing. Oh, I wish you would. And so I had her kneel down and we just gave her to the Lord to have him pick out the right man. The next year, a whole family came. She didn't come, but I discovered it was her family. The father was a great scholar on birds and on flowers. Halfway from the boat up to this place where we all stayed, he found 19 different flowers. In fact, he could hardly get him to walking. To walk 3 miles, he'd take him an hour to walk 100 yards. He'd find so many flowers. Wonderful scholarly man. I finally said, why did your whole family come? Well, my daughter came last year, and you prayed for her to find the right young man, and she found him. And it was such a wonderful marriage that the whole family's come up here, and all of us have now some soul sincere desire we want you to pray for. So the point is, but I said, well, you've got to pray for it and then relinquish it. It doesn't, there's no power if you just ask for a thing and then hang on to it. Then you're not putting yourself on the beam with God. You're commanding God. Oh, there's a man named Bill Horn. It's a big story how I helped him, and but then after he got helped by Belfast, then he went rushing after all the cults, he and his wife did. And he got the impression that all you had to do, the world's, your supplies, all out there. Command it. Just reach out. She said, my wife wants to go over to Germany. She hasn't been there for many years. She wants to go over and see her family. And so I'm asking the Lord to send us $2,000. I said, all right, ask him, but relinquish it unless he has something, if he has anything better. Oh, no, I don't believe in that. I've gotten over that. The supply is there. I'm just saying I'm commanding my own. I'm just going to ask that and demand that $2,000. I said, well, that isn't just my way, but yes, he said, I discovered the supply is all there. Just don't ask it, don't take it. I met him a year later, and he was on crutches, and I asked him what the year had been, and I said, I remember about your praying for the $2,000. Yes, and it was answered marvelously. Another car ran into my Pontiac, smashed it all to smithereens. I was in the hospital for 6 months. I'm just out now on crutches. But they paid all the expenses, the hospital expenses, and they gave us $2,000, just exactly what we needed. I said, is your life insured? He said, yes, for $10,000. Oh, I said, it's awful good. I'm awful glad you didn't pray for $10,000. You'd have gotten that, if your wife would. And they've been in a very nice cemetery. All the expenses would have been paid. Nice funeral. You'll get it if you demand it, but don't demand it on your own terms. And so is a little boy of 9. That's when your dreams begin. You begin to daydream. Oh, I had so much joy with daydreaming with little Mary Lou, and she just came 9. We knew she was going to heaven. And she loved to talk about heaven, and all she wanted to talk about was the Camps Farthest Out. But I loved it. I was so glad that she reached the age of 9 because we did a lot of daydreaming together, and for the world. And, well, here it was, 9. My cousin Carrie was 9. And I said, when I grow up, I want to become a famous writer. Oh, she said, I expect you want to live in a garret and have long hair like the poets. I haven't achieved either of those distinctions yet. Then I said, what do you want to be? She said, I want to become rich and put on style. Her father was an alcoholic, a hopeless drunkard. They were in poverty. She's a beautiful girl. She was reaching out her soul's sincere desire. 30 years, almost 30 years had gone by. I hadn't become a famous writer. She was still working as a clerk in the 10-cent store, getting about $10 a week. I went to see her in Milwaukee, and she asked me if I'd become a famous writer yet. I said no. Have you become rich yet? No. And then I went back to my teaching, and I found my students, even the freshmen, were doing better writing than I did when I was a freshman. Of course, they had a better teacher. Then I relinquished my desire to become famous, and I said, I'm going to throw myself, Lord, into the passion to making them famous. And the moment I relinquished it, all of a sudden, the Lord began to write books through me. The Atlantic Monthly began to accept my articles. The moment I relinquished that desire, the power came. Now, this cousin of mine is very selfish. She got religion. It's on these rather advanced, impatient creeds. I call them impatient creeds because our churches confine themselves too much just to the Sunday morning service. And we formed the habit, we laymen, of going to our churches as we would to a middle-class Rotary Club. And so there's some groups that believe you should put this into business, put it into health. And they've been cults, which we could pull them all back from the cults the moment the church would be said, have its little spiritual clinic for healing, and have a businessmen's club where they could put their problems in before God. I'm going to tell you very honestly that I have called more people back, prevented more people going to the Christian Science Church than anybody in America. And yet some people say, are you preaching Christian Science? No. But I'm preaching what you can get the same power in the Presbyterian church that they run off and think they can only have a monopoly of it over there in their church. Well, she joined a rather wild group for a while, but it had one good effect. It made her forget herself. And she relinquished her desire to become rich. And she was crossing a street one night, and under the arc light, a bug got in her eye. She went to the corner drugstore, and a handsome stranger, tall stranger, took out a clean handkerchief and extracted the bug from her eye. But in the process, he got a bug in his eye. And after 3 months, he asked her if she would become his wife. And then he broke the news that he was getting $25,000 a year, and he'd like to have her put on style. Now, don't think that we were using God as a cosmic bellboy. Because if you ring for hot water and the bellboy waits 30 years before he brings it to you, that isn't very much service. But I have found you don't have to wait 30 years like Carrie and I did. If you want a thing and then say, I relinquish it. And that's revealed in the next one. Love and peace. If you love someone, you're in danger of some suffering. I love little Mary Lou. And I guess I won't ever love any little girls anymore. I love them all the more. The vacuum. She hardly got to heaven before she picked out little Kathleen and sent Kathleen down to help fill the void in her granddaddy's and her daddy's and mother's hearts. At any rate, I know men who refuse to marry. Finest president of a big company. He lived next door. I used to go over and watch him make boats, sailboat. He had hay fever and go up on the Minnesota during hay fever season. And I wondered why I never married. But he said, I was engaged to a young lady, and she jilted me. And I don't want to ever suffer the pangs of being jilted again, so I've just refused. Now, that's all cowardice. You can't have love or fall in love, that you may lose that lover, but you have grown spiritually. It releases a power. They say all the women poets, the great women poets, were ones who had been disappointed in love, and they let that great power, wistfulness, pour out in poetry. I have found that if you love someone, the difficult thing is to relinquish him. And so when I got a telephone call from a beautiful woman who had graduated from McAllister 12 years before, telling me that her 10-year-old son had infantile paralysis, and I've just read your book, Prof, won't you pray for him? A week later she called up again and she said 6 doctors have just left the home and they say that he can't live to the day. What is his condition, I asked her. Well, he's been paralyzed from the neck down for a week. He's having 2 convulsions a minute for the last 4 hours. He has a temperature of 105. Well, I said if the president should invite him to come to Washington to be Secretary of State and sit at his right hand, you wouldn't insist on his staying back home, would you? Of course not. Heaven is a much more wonderful place than Washington, and God is far greater than the president. Supposing he wants him to come up to heaven and sit at his right hand, if you were sure that was best for the boy, not knowing what horrible things he might have to go through in this life, would you object? If it is best for the boy, well, if you'll take that spirit and go up to your room and pray, I'll pray with a lot of power. And she said she would. An hour later she called up and she said, I've been on my knees. I told God this is not a son of mine, he's a son of God's. He's just loaned to me, and I'm going to relinquish him completely in his hands. And all I'm asking is whatever is best for the boy. Oh, I said, that gives God the complete control to bring in any healing or anything he wants. That's wonderful. She had lots of relatives. They just packed the house. She's the best cake baker in Minnesota. She baked an angel food cake. She served them chocolate and coffee and passed the cake.